Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second panel discussion, which is going to focus on computation. I'm going to bring our panelists in, and we are going to meet them. So, as we are waiting for our panelists to join us and see them, there they are. I also, again, want to note for everyone here that we are broadcasting from the 4th floor of 320 Newbury Street at the Boston Architectural College. You can see that we also are broadcasting to our computer labs, which I find appropriate for the subject matter of today. And while this is not necessarily an event that people RSVP for, right? This is maybe even not an event that some of the people in these rooms knew was going to happen, but it is happening, and we are happy they are here. This is being recorded and is posted to my YouTube account, so you can watch it later. And with all that said, we're going to kick it off. So I know our panelists are excited. We have had a lot of conversations, which we also structured into the description of this event. And I want to start with an old friend of mine, and that is Tim. And so, Tim, welcome. Me and Tim have been having a lot of really exciting conversations about some opportunities to collaborate together, which I'm not going to say more about. But Tim, go ahead.
Hey everyone, nice to meet you. My name is Timothy Halvorson. Was with Peter as a North Dakota State graduate in Fargo, North Dakota. So shout out Bison. I recently launched Sevenfold, which is a design technology consulting agency, but also going to have some self-paced courses that are going to be launching in 2024. So very excited about that to help assist architecture firms and schools of architecture with the technical aspects of implementing technology in your practice. And so, but my background before that was 4 years at HDR doing traditional practice in architecture, everything from concept to completion. Did a year on a high-end museum project out in LA, doing a deep kind of design, build, fabrication, grasshopper, and rhino work. Did that for a year. Can talk more about that when we get to the discussion. And then 3 years at Gensler as a design technology specialist over the Southwest region. So 1,000 people, 850 designers. Got it tapped into a lot of big projects as well. So happy to bring my perspective in whatever way is most valuable. So excited to be here, and thanks for having me, Peter.
Thanks, Tim. All right. Next, another great friend of mine who ends up being on Zoom with me a lot and is also not matching me today like he was in the previous panel. So Brad, how's it going? And I want to comment that you have not only participated in the fabrication panel, but now participating in the computation panel. That was my fault. Everyone, I apologize. Brad, you should be good to go.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thanks for hosting another one of these conversations. I think having these forums that you're putting together and everyone's starting to participate in are super important for the broader community, especially with all the times that we're living in with all the different technological convergence that's occurring. It's probably the most exciting time to be in this profession, just both from material science standpoint, design expression, and then the use of technology in all of its various forms to help create the built environment. So I think the biggest thing that I bring to the computational design space is that of a cheerleader. I don't know how to do any of the wonderful things that Ade and Timothy and Jimmy are doing. But I know I can see it, I can see the patterns, I can see the insights, and I can help connect the dots, if you will, on the fabrication side and design side, collaborating with engineers. And so while I don't actually do the things, I have had many great opportunities to work with very talented folks to create amazing custom scripts or automations or generative design things, all of which empower the designer to iterate faster, to increase performance, to realize aspects about the design process that were opaque to them before. So as the cheerleader, I see all these technologies as a way to create a symbiotic relationship between practitioner and technology to help benefit the industry as a whole.
Great to have you here, Brad. And I really think this connection, right, the through line of fabrication, computation is important. All right. So our next guest, Michael Kyes, is here. And Mike and I have talked some really interesting conversations about computation in somewhat of a different way. And I know Mike has a lot to talk about, but we've talked about like, how is this changing the way offices, firms behave, right? How employees interact with each other, that kind of stuff. So Mike, how's it going?
Going well. Peter, thanks for inviting me to your show. Love your show. Can't miss it. Friday nights. And I echo what Brad's saying too, for all the students listening in. Maybe you have other things to do on a Friday night. I know when I was a student, but having these available, these forums, is priceless. And not only after the fact, I'm not a student anymore and I enjoy things like this, but when you're a student, you get to really dig in. You get to be inspired by the kinds of conversations that happen, and you get to explore. So I really hope that after tonight, you'll be energized to do that. Yeah, I love talking with Peter about just some wild things and see us try these things. And a lot of the people on the panels that I know and that I don't are trying these things as well as you students. So I, as a bio, I run an architectural group within an integrated practice. So what does that mean? I work at SMMA. We're an integrated practice of architects, interior designers, and engineers, landscape architects. We do it all primarily on the design and engineering side, and hopefully we do it all together as much as we can with our projects. But running the 70 or so architects that we have running the department, I get to see a lot of different ways of working, a lot of different team dynamics, lots of different technological uses. We have a design technology group within the office and a sustainability group. And with all this complexity and all this support, I really get to see how these things come together and how can I, in a way, like Brad said, be a cheerleader and be encouraging folks to work together. So yeah, I just hope this discussion will be fruitful for all of you students, fruitful for all of us talking about this, and eager to see where it leads.
Thanks, Mike. That said a lot of things I care a lot about really well, which is like advocacy and just getting people excited, right? Moving on now to someone I'm getting to know a lot better. Ade is here. And for the life of me, I can't exactly imagine, or not imagine, but remember how we got connected. And then I connected you with another individual recently, Anne, who has work that you're interested in. So Ade, what is exciting to you about this?
Yeah, again, Peter, as always, thank you very much. And I think I sort of echo everybody in saying it's important to have cheerleaders, and maybe you're like cheerleader number one out of everyone else, sort of organizing and getting these groups and making sure sort of like this momentum is continued. I think it's always great to position myself. Maybe unlike most people, I don't actually come from an architecture background. My background is software engineering. But I sort of like live in the built environment, and you can't help by be inspired, moved one way or another by sort of like the building that's sort of like that's around you. And that's sort of slowly sort of figured out, driven me more and more sort of to understand architecture, the processes of building, but also with a lens of I have some skill sets in terms of building complex software systems, combining data and sort of like powering processes and understanding how can some of that be brought forward sort of into the world of the built environment. My exciting piece right now is I think we have so much processing and computation power at our fingertips. Not only can it make us more efficient, but it can actually help us understand people better. And I think that's one of the things that excites me about some of the work that someone like Anne also at the Boston College is sort of working on, she's really doing the work to sort of understand how people operate and evolve in the built environment. And my hope is that I can partner with people like those, kind of bring those forward sort of into the computation space and sort of like tie the food chain, sort of like from research to application, and sort of empower those designers to make the right decisions.
Thanks, Ade. I look forward to all of the collaborations we're going to have in the future. All right. So Jimmy is next and our fifth panelist. And here, Jimmy, I'm going to do this and be very specific about what I'm reading from, which is notes I take when we do our 15-minute quick conversations. And I just furiously write down what you guys rant at me, which also, interestingly, I then use AI to generate the description of our talk from. And the first thing I have written down is more pedagogy role of computation, and specifically BIM as a tool for computation. And you don't have to respond to that, but how's it going?
Good. Yeah, thank you, Peter, for inviting me. And then it's my pleasure to be on a panelist with this like experienced and talented, wonderful panelist. And then, so I'm just give a little bit short background introduction of myself. So I used to teach in BAC like a few years ago, and then after that I left to work in a company in Japan. And then after that, I just start to get interested in how this, because I was working on like a converting the digital model to the construction like side to be able to build. And then the process for doing this conversion, I just start to get interested in the technology. So I just dive into this field, and now I'm currently studying a PhD program in the University of Florida right now, specifically focusing on the AI, how to leverage AI power to, in terms of helping us to be more creative, and then also for the social good. But I know today topic is not about AI, but again, I'll provide my opinion about how this has been influenced the way we teach, or how we can leverage the power of being in terms of in the office environment or in the school environment. And then I think that's probably the main topic I will talk about today. And thanks again for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Great. And I also want to kind of make specific reference, or encourage you to make specific reference to what you do, right? The work and this thing. And I don't think you're the only one here. Do you want to talk more about that? Like real briefly, actually, or not? Either Jimmy or Ade.
Yeah. I'll give the start. I mean, I think probably, was probably rushed through a little bit that introduction there. Jimmy and I actually we've been collaborators for the past 2 years. We spent some time together at SciArc, where we did 2 programs together. The first one was specific around architecture technologies, and I was really sort of like struggling and trying to throw as much technology into the architectural process as possible and see what happens, is how I could put that coursework. It was great, but it was like a wild ride to go through. And then after that, we sort of like felt like we had to contextualize that a little bit more. So we got a chance to sort of go through a program that's more like design pedagogy and understand how do you situate these tools and sort of put them in the space, which is really great, especially when you've been sort of like drinking from the fire hose, right? You also want that time to sort of like reflect what's been going on. But since then, my focus has really been around the space of simulation and understanding, can we, with the computation power we have at our fingertips, start to understand, build AI models that represent human behavior. And then with the world of digital representation in the form of BIMs and 3D models, could we take those sort of agents that represent human behavior and place them in these virtual environments, and then start to learn to sort of see what outcomes come? Specifically, I'm most interested when you have multiple sort of like competing agents, not competing, but multiple stakeholders that you have sort of like balance and optimize. How do you work through that? And how do you sort of like sustain that knowledge and continue learning, not only at the beginning of the project, but sort of as you're iterating through design concepts all the way through towards the end when sort of like the building has been up and live. So with that, Jimmy and I, we were able to do some workshops. We did a workshop in Korea, which was great on the exact same topic. I think in early October, we did the same workshop again. So we're able to do it at Tubman University in Michigan, which is great. I think we may be doing another version of that coming up shortly here at SciArc as well. So it's nice kind of like seeing it go the way around. And I think right now, as the next step, we're pretty happy with the results. We're starting to look at those partners outside of just ourselves. So like we mentioned, Anne, we're hoping to sort of like both people researching the topic of human behavior within the building, and also specifically sort of practicing architects with real buildings, real projects. We're looking for those partners so we can start testing this out and teasing out in the real world and see what we can learn about how we actually use the built environment.
Thank you. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that. I wanted to spend a little bit more time on that. This is new technology techniques, which also is about new technologies, right? Whatever they might be. And while this isn't a platform, right, to just kind of like get something out there, a name drop or whatever, as we know, this is a place to share those things and to talk about what we're developing with everyone. That also, welcome, thank you all to my panelists for being here. I also want to take a moment to again acknowledge that this is a BAC DME digital media education in collaboration with AIAS. And we have my co-moderator, Nushin, who's here, who's going to be on the chat, helping us out there. We are very happy to be partnering with AIAS in this. This is a student-focused thing, and we really encourage all our students to learn more about new technologies. We know that it is overwhelming, and we know that as a part of this panel, we want to actually do demonstrations, to do workshops from this. I hear this all the time from students. With that, I also very specifically would like everyone to use the petition link to petition for something you hear here and to say, I would like to know more about that. I want to see that. I have told everyone here, including President Das, who joined us for the panel discussion, that you cannot share any visuals. And that is so that we develop a bit of FOMO around these things. And we say, I want to see that. So with that said, let's get into the bulk of this. We are going to talk as a panel for a bit. And at about 7 p.m. Eastern time, in about 30 minutes, we will then open it up for questions. Please feel free to put questions in the chat. Machine is watching those. And also, if you're on Discord, you can also put it there. We also do this weird, awkward thing to see if anyone in the labs at the BAC has a question and see how that goes as well. So, as you guys can imagine, I care a lot about education. This topic is actually very dear to my heart in many ways because I think that we need to do a better job educating students on computation. And I firmly believe that this needs to be implemented earlier in education. And I'm talking about things like scripting and coding, these new developing languages. And yes, within architectural education, within landscape architecture education, within interior design education, and our allied fields, this is hard because we have a lot to actually get through. But let's take this opportunity to start to suggest some of those changes. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask us to linger on education for a moment and on this question of how do we educate students. I'm going to ask Tim to talk a little bit about what he's doing to kick us off. And I also want Brad to participate in this before we move on. The other panelists will have a chance to talk about this, but Tim, please, what is this?
Hey, Peter. Yeah, I'm getting all excited just as you're talking about the topic. Is there a question there? But no, I mean, I would say my specialty has been translating the technical research into actionable insights and tools that you can actually implement. And so I've been thinking about this probably my whole career. As I reflected just recently on that, and I realized, there's the folks that have taken the deep dive, and I took that deep dive when I was in school as a 5th year student. I learned Rhino and Grasshopper and Dynamo all at the same time. I just dove in, ate up lynda.com tutorials, and then just tinkered around, and now it's LinkedIn Learning. And I'm hoping to bring the new generation of resources now, but you just having the framework, you sort of start with, you just throw yourself in headlong. And I think now that it's matured, people have developed extremely sophisticated tools. We've seen how visual scripting like Grasshopper and Dynamo can be a stepping stone to more robust tools in C# and Python that can be fully compiled and fully efficient. But the thought process, I bought a book called Pattern Language that was Berkeley, and this guy was a mathematician and an architect. And that actually set up object-oriented programming, which then set up the whole future of software development. And so it's interesting how the roots of programming came from an architect. And you see that, and you see how everything's an object with decorations and properties and data attached to it, which, if you get that basic idea, rolls into BIM and model-based delivery and all the requirements that are coming down the pike. So there's all the data, and there's how to use the data and how to collaborate on that. And so my point is I'm really passionate about building tutorials that are outcome driven, not just, hey, there's a button, we should click it. Focus on where we're at as a current practice and where we could be going. And so really all the resources I'm focusing on developing has integrated a value-driven approach. It's not just the buttons, but again, what is the outcome? What is the deliverable? How am I collaborating with my team? I'm not doing everything as a siloed developer. I'm actually feeding that into a system where other people can develop. I've got, inputs and outputs, which again, we can talk more about, but like how to think about interfacing with other team members, not just developing in a silo. And again, I'm thinking about computation, but it really affects all of the technology. So again, my passion is, I'm a bit all over the place, but it's that outcome driven learning process. And then as as the tools and technologies change tomorrow, like if Revit ever goes away, will we still have a resilient culture? This is recorded. Will we have a resilient culture that can go with the next BIM tool, right? If Revit gets better, we know why it's better and how it's working for us. But if it's replaced, hypothetically, then as an industry, we're more nimble. And so my passion is framing things from the outcome and where I'm contributing, because it's a team sport in architecture, and we all accept this now. And really looking at the true kind of tech space always inspires me by how nimble and agile they are. And so I'm always trying to figure out how to translate what they're doing operationally into how we work as like holistic, because I've been on teams, there's 100, 250 people. How are we all working in harmony with each other? So that's my passion. And that hopefully translates into all the stuff I work on. So it's a little bit about where I'm coming from. That makes sense, Peter.
Yeah, it does. It makes a
Okay.
lot of sense. There's some things that are slightly different than some of the approaches I take in my own education practice. But I think that's also appropriate because your model is different than my model, right? I'm associated with an institution, right? I think your own identity, right? Or something, right? And I know you're doing partnerships or whatever, right?
Well, and that's the goal with Sevenfold, not to go off on it, but it was to sort of take things that I might have been developing in-house for a specific firm's interpretation of implementing BIM on certain accounts and saying, how can it be a resource for the whole industry to take advantage of? And it's not tied to any one institution, but it can simply be a resource that hopefully can drive digital change for the industry. That's the goal.
Right. And the importance of crowd sharing, I don't know, crowdsourcing, or like the democratization. Actually, that was the word I was looking for, because it has a firm connection to what we talked about in our last panel, the democratization of some of these things. And with this, I want to jump to Brad, because Brad and I have talked a lot about how this impacts students. And Brad, you've actually talked very passionately. I saw you couldn't even like hold yourself in. You had something to say and you mouthed it, right? And so how do we educate students? And this also relates to the description. We've had a lot of conversations about where computation is, panelization, right? Any kinds of building form making, which you work with your students in the studios.
Yeah. I may be preaching to the choir here, but yeah, definitely introducing computational design into the curriculum is hugely important. It's mandatory. And if it's not happening now, we're doing a disservice to the current students who, once they graduate, the consumers of the educational system, meaning the future employers, are actually expecting, these types of skill sets out of university to help push incumbent practices forward, right? They're literally relying on those skill sets. Back in the early 90s, they introduced, when I was at Syracuse, they introduced a class called like AutoCAD drafting, electronic drafting, or something like this. And it was like, you know, using AutoCAD 12 or whatever, and the pen plotters and all that sort of stuff. But it was an elective. And because everything else, all the professors were like, no, you must use ink on Mylar and all these sort of things. But that was the beginning of a technological shift. And I think where university needs to go is to apply the design thinking that we teach students. You know, you teach students how to design, right? And so it's like D school thinking. B schools, business schools, look for D school thinking, right? Because it's a different modality of viewing problems, problem solving, you know, all that sort of stuff. So we need to apply that D school thinking to technology so that you're not platform dependent on whatever you learn, but you're about the process. You understand the interrelationships. You understand how to play the instrument of data. And that is, you know, it's profound. And it's profound in a number of different ways, not just through form generation or form finding or whatever, which is what we're able to do in some of the design studios, but from all the different analytics, from workflow optimizations, even to and it may seem counterintuitive, but to structure D school thinking in a holistic way that makes you it's not just all the squiggles, but it brings order to that chaos, so that as a practitioner, you're able to translate that chaos of design concept into a rational set of coordinated drawings and specifications, right? That active translation is a very structured process. And all too often, the industry, or at least most people I work with, have a very difficult time being able to make that intellectual leap from pure design, you know, analog to more digital output. Certainly some people are just programmed that way. But if you want to be a successful architect, you have to be able to make that intellectual leap and bridge those two realities to be able to effectively communicate your design intent.
Can I dovetail off that, Brad? There's one comment I want to add, because as I was thinking, you know, it's the process of making that we always love talking about, you know, and how it shapes our way of seeing space. Well, flashing back to when I first started using Grasshopper and Dynamo, the process of building a tool that I could then build from would shape your thinking. And then later, when I was at Gensler, you know, evaluating, am I building something custom or am I buying something that's on the market? I still had to know what is the outcome that I'm aiming at. So then when somebody else did the effort to build the tool, I knew the value I was purchasing. So just going through the mental exercise of building your own tools when you're early on formats your brain a certain way to see the process of building and collaborating very differently. So I feel like that's why it's so essential to getting it as a student, you know, because it's definitely shaped the course of my career.
I agree. And I'm going to move to Mike real quick after this. And one thing I want to comment on is like Grasshopper, Dynamo, right? Visual programming, I think have a lot to do with computation as we talk about it, right? But that's just scratching the surface. And actually, I'm going to go a slightly different direction and encourage the use of something like a spreadsheet, right? To do computation. Brad, I know you agree with me on this. We've talked passionately about that. And I have done some also pretty amazing computation with spreadsheets, with Google spreadsheets. And with all that and kind of the various tools we use for computational thinking, I want to ask Mike what your impression of computational thinking is among both young architects, designers, and old architects. What are you seeing as you, you know, do your work?
Interesting question. And I'll rephrase it in a way too. what is computational design? And if you ask two people, you'll get 4 answers over time. I was just speaking with someone in the design technology group in my office. He recently was leading a discussion among, we have a computational design group or network that just get together and share some things every so often. And he was saying that his name is Diego, by the way. And what he was saying is that his understanding of computational design has changed over time. He used to think that that's an example. I mean, he made a really kind of a crazy leap, and it's good to think about this, that even going through a process of modeling something in SketchUp, like if we're comparing that with Rhino and lots of more sophisticated tools like Grasshopper, et cetera, but even thinking about using a tool like SketchUp and thinking through a process of what is your design and how do you go develop that intent and develop a system, so then you then go through in a manual process and are able to go through that same system or that same process that you're creating to then come up with an outcome. And it doesn't sound computational at all. Is the computer even thinking? It sounds a lot more like manual thinking, but that was the early days of computational design. How do I use a computer-aided modeler with my idea of a system or process and work together with it? Now we look at that today and say, that's just modeling in I love SketchUp, but just to compare it to others, somewhat unsophisticated modeling software. And now we're looking at things like AI that are just, changing everything. So it's all on a spectrum and how you understand computational design. And I would even say that there's aspects, if we asked all the speakers here today would probably get another 2 hours worth of discussion of just defining what it is. But there's things that I call computational operations, using something like Dynamo to create pages in Revit. It's something computational. It's something the computer is doing for us. Is it computational design? Maybe not. Or computational processes and using using Grasshopper scripts, using C#, using Python, portions of plugging it in. How much of those little portions are operational or computational process, or are they design? Maybe the whole thing is computational design. And one last thing, if you're tracking any of my dialogue, my monologue here, is that I find it interesting that the word computer that we can think of as we're looking at the screens, most of us right now are within your lab. It's a term that came a long time ago. Even like in the 1600s, there was a term of a person being a computer, someone who's thinking up something or summing something or counting something. And there's actually a movie, if you're familiar with this, called Hidden Figures, about 3 African-American women that were involved with the NASA space program in the 60s. And they were called computers. They were kind of behind the scenes doing all the really important work that was necessary. And then we developed machines that are computing and adding and doing that. And we just said, well, why don't we call these machines computers? So it's a big kind of historical explanation of what computational design is, and just trying to shake us up a little bit and think outside the box that we may be putting it in, and understanding it and analyzing it. Is it a process? What are the inputs? What are the outputs? How much do humans interact, or how much are humans part of a computational design process? How much are the machines part of a computational design process? Or is it all together?
Yeah,
how's that, Peter?
It's great. I'm really glad you brought some of these things up, and I'm going to give Ade and Jimmy a chance to collect their thoughts, because I'm going to go to them next and have them fight over the mic to kick things off. But while they're doing that, the history of computation, right? The history behind this is so intriguing. And while this says this is new technology techniques, these are not new. Computational thinking is not new, right? It's been around for a long time, right? I mean, you mentioned computers were people, primarily women, right? When it started, that movie is amazing. We also see this chance when Ivan Sutherland's Sketchpad was introduced to the world, and the news anchor is talking about it to the world. He says, unfortunately, right, please, world, understand there is a man behind this, right? With the concern that computers were taking over this space, right? You can look this up, see that original broadcast. I don't know if it was like the first broadcast, but it's on YouTube. And the last thing I wanted to mention here and bring into the conversation is parametricism or parametric design. And I would like Ade and Jimmy to kind of riff off of this and not be shy about being technical within your answers. And I actually feel very passionately against the term parametricism as it was coined by Patrick Schumacher, I believe, as like a style of architecture, right? In some way, in this idea that you can design something to look like parametricism. And he refers to parametricism as a hegemony, as a ruling force by power. And to me, that's concerning. Parametric within measure, I think is much more intriguing and much more captivating for us to think about that. So Jimmy, Ade, what do you think? And I know that was just like the whole thing, but go for it. Please take the conversation where you choose.
Kick it off, Jimmy.
Okay. So yeah, I think I'll just start from like I think I've been always fascinated about the idea of how different design tools or drawing tools that influence well design, like will help us to represent the idea differently. And I think this is what we have been teaching in the school, like how do we transfer one information from one medium to the other, as we have been doing from the hand drawing to any kind of tools, including the parametric. And then I feel it's a shame to say like parametric is a style, because I think that lose the essence of using the tool. And then because this is also not a problem, but the issue that when we talking about taking the class, like Revit class or grade sharp class in a school, we always frame as a really technical class. And maybe we should think another way, like maybe it's a different way of thinking about design. Like it has a different design languages embedded in the system itself. It's more about the logic of how to use that. For example, sometimes students will come and say, how do you model this in grade sharp? But the point is not about the form, it's about the logic to get there. It's about the system. I think that is how I see these tools. And then I like the term Brett brought up, the instrument of using manipulating the data, because I feel that as we are facing this kind of AI trend or this new technology coming, and then I feel there's another way we need to educate students or start giving ideas about how do we really utilize this data, because ultimately if the whole design process can be automated, then what is architecture design, and how do we define architecture design with these new tools we are using? And then yeah, I guess that's what I'll just stop here and then I'll continue maybe if the other has some response.
Sure. Thank you. I'm actually gonna maybe swing back to something that sort of like Tim said earlier on. As in some way, as an outsider, it's fascinating to me that there's this thing called parametric design, because I think when you're somebody who's worked sort of like in computation, writing code, writing compilers, writing programs for sort of different sort of levels, the fact that you sort of like carve a parametric design to be something different, and that to the life of me, maybe there's just sort of like my brain has not been wired that, I still don't understand what it is and I cannot pinpoint it. It just seems like it's a process in which generates certain outcomes, right? Because, and I think this Tim was trying to think about this, when I was taught programming and sort of like computation methods, it was never about like learning Grasshopper or learning C#. What's more important is sort of like learning the way of thinking, of organizing data, combining things together. Because typically what you'll find is every tool you're using now is a legacy tool. It's not a tool of the moment. It comes from a history. People are trying to solve certain problems. And as you encounter it, especially for students, you'll be interested in sort of in a different cultural moment. So you're trying to address things differently. So part of your job is to kind of look at this thing and not be enamored with parametric design or enamored with Grasshopper, but to kind of say, I'm trying to achieve this outcome. How can I combine the data, combine the pieces in this way? Oh, hang on, is there a different way in which this can be combined to sort of arrive at new outcomes, right? And I think really school and education is really supposed to be the space that does that. So I think in some way, Peter, sort of, maybe not from the exact same reason, I sort of like a strict discomfort with the idea of parametric design as a thing that you learn as a class. I think it's more, it's different ways in which we can combine and reach an answer. And what's more interesting is like, what are the new ways in which we can do that, rather than specifically thinking of it as a style and something very specific. And I think sort of like keeping with the idea of the outcomes and thinking about how is it, well, we have an outcome, we have sort of factors that we're trying to combine and work through towards a certain outcome is really what is sort of maybe open up the space and actually allow you to start consider sort of being fixated. I need to do this with Grasshopper. You're more interested in the outcome, and you start thinking about different ways, different opportunities, and maybe it'll speed up the possibility that there'll be something else other than Revit for us to use. And I think as like these tools becomes more accessible and easier to use, like those larger office, they have an in-house computational team to produce like own interface or customize this like interface inside the Rhino Grasshopper. And then as this becomes easier, I think we need to just rethink about, like, we're talking about data. So what is like the real data that maybe student or what we need to learn about is maybe I want to bring the idea of search. How we search is how we design today, because we kind of search the answer from online, and then I feel like often like even like Bin software or like Revit, there's you can search different component, different product inside becomes your asset into your design process. But how to? Well, I think the user or a student need to know how to evaluate the value of this product. Maybe because we often take it as a default and then take granted, just use it, and then becomes the output of the product. So the outcome is being highly controlled by what is being provided by the tool itself. So what do we need to do? Maybe we think about what kind of data we can input it into these tools and create our own model or own asset into this whole system. Then our design language or design thinking will come in from how to curate this data. So as a designer, it becomes like a curator, like Peter and I was talking about. If all the data is being like being provided is really limited, how do you find creativity in the process? And then I think my answer, I have answer now. Like we're gonna be more like a curator, because you curate a show or exhibition, but all the materials out there, but you still have really like create different like interesting or a creativity way to exhibit the show in different way. And then I feel like architecture gonna become something like this. How do we organize this data to find the creativities out in this constraint?
Yeah, and I want to go to Tim too. And we're coming up at the time where we ask if there are any questions or we bring any questions forward from our audience. Before we do that, and again, if you're here as well, please post your questions. We will address them. It's not just about us, right, panelists? But Tim, like, how do you address this thing of like searching, right? That people can go out and find answers on the web, and just the massive amount of information out there. And then here, this like idea of curation, right? This idea that we can do something. I've watched plenty of projects happen where someone did something because they can do it, right? Which from a pedagogical point of view can be very problematic, even though I am guilty of doing that for many studio projects of mine when I was in school. And then I guess kind of to the model you've created, Like, what is the difference between what you're doing and Google searching something?
Yeah, that's the human piece that Michael was talking about. I think there's a lot of thoughts that was coming up while you guys were talking, and I feel like one thing I'll just say is, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. And I think we go between this, we're designers, so we like to control things, and so we like to, this is my design, even though there's a whole team involved, and there's a sense of ownership over the creative process. And when you suddenly are given every possible tool to create, and the fact that you can create your own tools that aren't even, it's more than what's given to you out of the box, like you can make more. Now there's this pursuit of making control over every little aspect of it, but pretty soon it becomes a burden to maintain all of that, all those options, all those controls. And so then you try to simplify it back down to what matters. What data should I be focusing on? What is the things that actually moves the needle towards a better stewardship of the building, better energy consumption, better material utilization, material science, all that. So then you start to weed down, or is it brand driven? So there's all these like design thoughts. But so in terms of curation, right? Just because you can build a tool doesn't mean you should. So yes, you could hypothetically control every little aspect of every nut, every bolt, every paint swatch. And yet if you zoom out, is there any consistency? Is there any story being told about the design? And so does it have a sense of place? Is it only in where that site is in the world? It relates to its local climate, it relates to its local people. And yet in a globalized society, what does that look like? So I think it's interesting where there's a lot to talk about, but my default reaction with AI, in terms of curation and Google, is, do I trust it, right? Because in that sense, I'm after a certain outcome. I want certain information, and the moment I feel it's appeased, then I move forward. And yet Google's been curating top results for years now, and yet, okay, do I just accept that and move on, or where do I insert a quality check and some deeper due diligence on that specific aspect of my project? So that's where I get, to what Jimmy was saying. How do we create feedback loops so that we have the data, we serve it back up to the designer in a useful way so that it's informing a better design? And for me, I'm passionate about better stewardship of the materials and the energy we're using in our buildings. But there's all these other aspects that you could quantify. It's just, we should, and I think that's the biggest gap to fill right now, is increasing data literacy so that when we serve it up to the designers, they're empowered to make better decisions rather than the tools making those decisions for them. And that's, I feel like, a huge gap we need to fill, if that makes sense. But
I tend to agree, even though I think that a lot of us are still forming or realizing that this is an important conversation. And
totally,
we are going to shift now to this audience participation, right, point. I'm going to read this question that John posted in the chat here. In a recent conversation Benjamin Bratton had with Do Not researchers Joshua Satella, he discusses how the manifestation of data is not only the data set, but also the aesthetics of data in a historical context. Do you think that the search or control command function should be designed? And during this portion, you guys can fight over the mic.
kind of extends what I was just saying. I mean, the control F, right? Control find. What am I searching for? But then how do I quantify how it's returning a result? We've been trusting Google for so much to get us, but yet can we make our own Google for design that's unique to my style of design versus your style of design? And I think that's what I'm excited about with AI, is actually having closed loop data sets within a firm that can start to curate a style that's unique to that firm or that designer. And so when we go finding something, it's within a set of solutions that they've already thought through in the past, potentially. I don't know, that's just some initial thoughts. I don't want to take the mic too long.
I'll just chime in a little bit. A little detour here, if I may. I'm fascinated by language, right? I think language is an example where even though people are sort of like may live in the same environment, but sort of like the language they use and the words they use to express sort of like the world and their emotion and feelings tends to sort of like then control in terms of how they feel, how they approach, and how it felt. Like it has a profound impact, the language you speak and how you use it, just like in your norms and how it is. And I think language could maybe sort of see as a parallel. I kind of see like as a search engine, right? Language is the mechanism by which we use sort of like explore, explain, and understand the world around us. Depending on what language you use, for example, if you're maybe Italian, you'd be, not to be really sort of like, what's that word? It just misses me. But different languages have different ways of communicating. The German and maybe the sort of like the Dutch would be more strict, very sort of like mathematical. Other language would be more flowery. But even though they're looking at the same thing, the same data set, but those are just interfaces in which people have sort of like, based on the context, learn to sort of work and with the system. So I think, yes, the interface within which you use sort of like access the knowledge and access the data has a huge impact sort of like into the insights and your understanding of sort of like what comes out of it. Data is not neutral. The interface really plays a big important role. I think the same parallel goes in terms of a building. A building may say it's about shelter and protection, true, but like sort of like the articulation and the way you do it creates totally different experiences and different sort of ways of really having you understand what a building is and what a building can be and what you're supposed to feel from a building. So in this perspective, I say fully yes. I think the data is important, but sort of how you access, present, it will sort of engender different ideas, different thoughts, and different ways of thinking what you can do with it or not do with it. And that's the scary part when we have sort of this monopolies of the kind of like Google, which make you feel like there's only one way of getting to data, or because they're really starting to control and really put a very single aesthetic of what data and how it can be used, when really the possibilities are endless. And I think the more interfaces, the more we can think about how do we present it differently at different points, really opens that and maybe allows us to access different parts that right now we're not able to.
Yeah,
So
and I
not
want
only-
to go to Brad, who read my mind. Thanks, Brad. Go for it.
Okay. I was just to continue the thoughts, it's maybe not just also access of the data, but understanding the data, the interrelationships of data, and the new things that are then created in different permutations of the data. So it's not just the thing. If you think about molecules or whatever, right? You have standard elements, but you combine them in different ways. Proteins fold and these sort of things, and you manifest themselves in different ways. A more practical relationship is, different, compatibility of materials, say for an exterior enclosure, how different systems play with each other. So it's unfortunately, it's D, all the above, and you have to have the wherewithal to at least be literate. I'm not just talking conversant, but the first step is just to be, just have that understanding so that you can play in this arena.
Brett, have you run into kind of not specific to coding or scripting or those languages, but language when you're working with students, right? Like a different language, or whether we're talking about actual different language, like the difference between German, right, and Brazilian Portuguese, right? Or which I mentioned because I think German tends to be a little bit more technical and right, like things, and then Brazilian Portuguese is a lot more sing-songy, and we can say many other things about this. But could you linger on that, Brad? Like also like knowledge about facade design, right, or the making process, and like how might computation, I don't know, help or hinder this?
Yeah. So two thoughts there. So on the language component, there's a few things. So there is man, for incoming, emerging professionals, incoming students that are coming into this very deep and broad industry, there's a tremendous amount of just jargon and words. Maybe you heard of the word, in a normal, civilian context, but within our industry, it has different meanings and used in different contexts. And so while they're all English words, when you try to explain, like, to your mom, like, what do you do, or you describe a thing, you're like, what the hell are you talking about? Right. So it's English, but you're talking a foreign language. And so there's a tremendous learning curve just for students to get up to speed, so that there is, and unfortunately, just like in natural languages, the architectural language has regional dialects, if you will. So things in different corners of this country, different idioms or colloquialisms are used to describe the same context, but in a completely different way. So that's just challenging. And then when you get into sort of a structured annotation language when delivering, or that you would use in contract documents. So now I'm talking like keynotes and other sort of structured language, because as students in middle school and high school, we're taught to write in a poetic kind of way, right? Utilizing elegant variation in the prose at which we can use to describe our ideas or feelings or whatever you're trying to communicate. In contract writing, it's very important that you use the same kind of word choice and the same kind of semantics and the same kind of logic, because they form part of a contract document that lawyers are trained on. And if you're like my old position, I used to be on the phone with lawyers all the time, talking, defending, and dealing with sorts of horse shit. So you have to use a certain thing. You have to use natural language in a way that natural language is foreign. You're not used to using a natural language in such a highly structured way. So that's just yet another complexity layered on to the whole language phenomenon. So I actually find it easier to use alphanumeric code text to structure contract documents and get out of natural language, just to avoid that type of confusion, right? So you just abstract the language to such a degree that it's almost, it forms its own new language, but in kind of in a reduced instruction set sort of way. I guess then the second question had to do with enclosure systems and computation and digital fabrication and all these things. So it's like once you poor students, once you get your head wrapped around just to be able to like figure out how to communicate, it's like, okay, now, all right, now you got to figure out how to communicate all these ideas, and you have to understand and synthesize all these complex data sets in a way that you can then convey this grand vision of whoever to someone who, doesn't share the same passion, doesn't share the same insights, doesn't share the same language that we're all taught, in school to be able to practice. So very much part of the architect's job is to literally get people excited about doing things perhaps in a little different way, be that champion, be that cheerleader for, trying to achieve the vision. And then it's just trying to figure out what language to use, and then with data structure. So it's like super challenging. So I hope I don't depress anybody about going through all these different layers of trying to just deal with the topic of communication. But when it comes to like digital stuff, it just makes me really upset when you get walled gardens from the major monopolies who inhibit communication, and really am passionate about supporting open source projects. I mean, think of it today, like the walled gardens that we have are like early internet, circa 96, when if you had a CompuServe account or an AOL account, you couldn't talk to or email anyone else that wasn't on AOL or CompuServe. I mean, holy cow. And it's 2023, it's almost 2024, and we're still doing that. I mean, it's just completely absurd. All right, sorry.
I agree, Brad. I agree. And I wanted to let some of your passion come through for a bit there. Thank you. I'm going to go to Mike next. And there's a lot here. Mike, you're able to respond to all of it, but I'm also going to bring forward another question from the chat from Nasheen. Thank you very much. And the question is, what are some of the current steps, examples you can think of that are being taken to eliminate bias, especially with the increase of data curation on every platform we use globally? And now I know this kind of shifts the topic. Feel free to relate it to our current conversation, but how do you feel about that, Mike?
Well, when I hear that, I think of some of the concerns we have for what we see with AI and the returns that we get from understanding, putting in, I'm just make up something up like what a doctor is, and then you see a white male, and to say, well, that's certainly a bias, and so there'll be tons of bias in AI, probably in the early days and maybe in all days, because AI at the end of the day is not computerized intelligence; it's a combination of human intelligence put together and brought back to you. So we probably can't solve it. However, I think bias is a good, maybe seen as a negative thing, but I think bias should be seen as a thing that's neutral and that we all have them. And as designers, what I mean by that is when designing a building, you might have a bias to want to make this the most high-performing, sustainable building ever. You want to make sure that this glass facade is going to be shaded so that you don't overheat the space and pay a lot to cool it, et cetera. But you also may realize that this glass facade is at an entry, and that you want to also in the evening have it glow, or there's some other competing parameters in the design. So to be able to think about parametric design, this is another way of thinking of it. Parametric design is only form finding. And when I say parametric design to a group of people, they may be thinking Zaha Hadid and other interestingly shaped buildings that are made because you're parametrically controlling the overall massing. But I think it might help to think about computational design in terms of multi-parametric design, and to be able to say, what are the trade-offs between a building that I do want to be high-performing, sustainable building, but also to be aesthetically affecting a certain vernacular and also cost-effective. And so those are three of many, many parameters that we want to put in to study a design. And we can do this as humans without a computer, but to do this with humans plus computers allow us to have much more choices to help our design process. So in that aspect, I think bias is important to consider in terms of trade-off. And just one last thing about language and bias is when we again think about what is the parametric design style. We all have an understanding. I'll just hold this up too, because we have an ornament design in our office every year, and this is a very what people might call a parametric design. It's a Mobius strip that's been 3D printed, and there's lots behind it that we can't get into. But the fact that Airbnb has been a huge success, because instead of just going to a hotel and staying in a room that you could probably draw on a floor plan really easily, as your bathroom and your bedroom and your TV, but Airbnb allows you to go across the world and find really interesting new places to be in and have it more of the vernacular of the country you're going to. And over time, there's found out to be an Airbnb style, right? And then you figure, how did this happen? I thought we liked Airbnb because it was so parametrically limitless, and then all of a sudden you realize that this certain bias of style, or maybe a mid-century modern bias came into that, to be able to say that I'd like to stay at places like this all over the world, which full circle means that you're basically staying in a hotel again. So bias is important as designers to consider. Again, it's not negative, it's not positive, it's neutral. And we just have to understand what it is we're thinking through, and how can we use computers? How can we use the data that's coming through the internet, the data that we're processing through our different tools to come up with a design that is honest and that we can explain and understand personally, and explain obviously to our clients, and make sense to our users ultimately.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Now, I'm really happy to see these questions in the chat, and I'm going to go to Jimmy first. And Ade, you're welcome to participate in this as well. And John in the chat gave a great question, multiple questions. So I'm going to pick one of them, and it is: can we, as researchers and architects, curate data without creating bias, while also maintaining an aesthetic data set and outcome? Jimmy, what do you think about that?
Yeah, before that, I would like to probably respond to what Tim was like typing in the chat. When I use the analogy of curation and search, I wasn't really referring to generative AI or the way we train the data. I was more talking about the data that inside your own office or inside your own collaboration, that your designer generate amount enormous of data of the design, and those usually go to the somewhere in the office. But while we have some organizing system that can be able to trace all the project you have produced, and to be able to see the project you have already complete, and to see, and then to use this technology to help you to be able to search, like based on the manufacturer, based on the client, based on the product, based on how big the building is, and then you can find the useful information for your next project. And then and this is like Ade's specialty, can help you to build this platform. But this is the idea we've been talking about, like the way we use the data, not just like throw to machine learning to generate something, but more like we how do we really keep this like a great asset inside the office, and to be able to search on your own like asset. And to really reply to John's question, I think for as a designer, I have a strong bias. I think it's hard to, but just like Mike said, like bias maybe it's a neutral thing. It's not necessarily to be bad, but just like it as long as it wasn't really affect the social good, the bias should be fine. Like, and I think as a designer, we should all have a bias in terms of aesthetic to create something unique, different. Yeah.
Ade, I would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I think that the difference is maybe in the world of AI, in the world of computation and the computer. I think it's been sold with this promise of objectivity and neutrality, right? I think that's maybe really that's where the challenge is, right? There's this implication that you will find the right data, you find the correct information, but I mean, Google has always been biased. Somebody has decided what data goes into the search engine. Somebody has decided how to rank it. So I think the question of bias now that I think that we're encountering right now is really not necessarily, it's always been there, but I think it's more of a reaction of understanding that maybe the firms that sold us this idea of computation and AI had sort of had implied this idea of objectivity, and in many cases of saying, I'll overcome the subjectivity of the human being and give you the perfect knowledge. Has always been like a little bit of that dream in there. Whereas I think what's exciting about the design world has always been about, which is a form of bias. Like, this is my perspective and my view of the world. And based on sort of my background, where I come from, I've collected a certain series of pieces of information. I've curated, I've chosen to say this is more important than the other thing, based on these principles, and put it together. And then I present to you a vision. And that is, I think the bias is inherently obvious. Like, nobody doesn't have to explain to it, and nobody tries to pretend that it's not there. I think with the advent of computation and maybe a little bit of parametricism has been a little bit of trying to, that language of computation sipping in and trying to pretend that it's not that. As somebody who's worked with computers, and at least my studies, computers have always been biased. I mean, Microsoft and Apple both work in computation, both give us PCs, both give us very different visions of PCs or what a computer should do and how it should interface with each other. Same as closed worlds and open sources. So I think it's always going to be biased. I think it's not there. I think the question is more, are we just being, it's a question of honesty. I think that's the real thing. I think that's what I find refreshing about design. There's a sort of like an honesty and in the vulnerability and saying, I may be wrong. I may, this may not be perfect, but I've done my best effort and I've collected a series of, I've done my due diligence to collect a series of information. This is what I present to you, while acknowledging that there's different options out there. And I think data curation and so on is just another form of doing that. I don't see it any differently, but there tends to be this idea that once you throw a computer in there, there's this promise of objectivity, which I think does a disservice to sort of like what we're trying to do. And I think we should just really be more upfront about those, because I think that's what makes design and the things that we do special, because they're all different and all sort of in some way tapping into what makes us unique. And part of that is our biases.
I think this is a really intriguing perspective, which I did not think we would linger on so long in this talk. I want to bring us back. Tim, I'm going to have you respond to this. And I'm trying to think of a way to bring BIM back into the conversation.
Oh, okay.
And normally I'm pretty good at this because my students, I have these things where I allow my students to just post random things for the start of class, and then I have to somehow contextualize whatever they post to the lesson plan. And
I could bridge if you want.
So anyways, Tim, respond to that. Like, how is BIM related to our conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I love the perspective because I started to go even more abstract in my mind around meritocracy and Ray Dalio's principles book, and just having a really genuine, we use the word bias, but perspective, opinion, you use the word vision, Ade. And I think that's part of, we're never designing in silos. We're always on teams. We're doing pinups and boards. We're looking at it together. We're getting different voices. And I think the more passionate you are about it, the better chance you have of actually winning over the group at your firm and then your client as a result. And so I think the more we cultivate those value-based, kind of passionate, merit-based conversations, which are very biased, but it's because of your perspective and why you believe what you believe, super important. And one comment I'll make is I've loved the idea of data-driven design since I got into the field. However, as I've gotten older and more practiced, it's always data supporting design solutions, because you always have to translate it into why it justifies bringing a certain perspective to round out and balance the design solution. It's not doing the designing for you, it's justifying a certain aspect. And then you're trying to weight that as a designer or as a group to make changes or not make changes. And so I feel like that's the bridge for me to say computation supports the insights that then sets up a decision-making process as part of how I'm synthesizing my design. And then that'll eventually make its way back into my model updates, right? And so once you're in the BIM model, now and then we get to our deliverables, right? So we're at BIM again. But I think, how we create tools to streamline those updates is always an ongoing conversation to boost our productivity. But I'm really keen on those insights of like, which pieces of data, like I'm really keen on sustainability, building performance, and how do we show I'm getting better daylight, I'm getting better natural daylight coming in, I'm reducing my heat gain, I'm picking better materials, I'm saving on money. And so because you make a couple upstream decisions, you see that ripple effect. And now and the AIA continues to reward designs that are holistic in their approach. It's not just the form like we've talked about. So I think that's the bridge for me. It's the data informing design, not necessarily driving design, but again, you can curate what is on your dashboard, and that's the bias that every firm and every designer should really question is, what am I allowing to shape my perspective on my solution? And I think a lot of people are designing kind of blind. They're just ignoring it. And there's other people who are super passionate about it. And so I think there needs to be a coming together of like what data matters that will actually drive a healthy, both objective and a subjective, you know, in my experience at HDR, they would do these scorecards. It was kind of like you built, each design option had kind of it was like reporting, you know, if you're like an NBA player and you scored a lot of points, you had a lot of assists and rebounds. You do that for your building and you'd evaluate it against all these metrics side by side. And some of them were quantitative and some of them were qualitative, you know, but then they'd sort of add it up and see, is this working? And do we believe in this design? They do that internal charrette and then they bring it before the client. So I think there's a lot of value in that approach. And then if you get more sophisticated with that, you could maybe map it into some generative algorithms that can sort of explore a bigger option set. But I think if you don't have that core of this is what we're comparing, then, you know, it's really not doing much for you. It's just data for data's sake.
Sounds like really interesting fantasy football analogy.
Yes. Yep.
Peter, could I add something on top of this, especially the bridge to BIM? And I do have to, I'll have to miss the last 15-minute throwdown. I apologize. But I'm really excited from a computational design standpoint with Rhino inside and using Revit and Rhino simultaneously. And we've been using it on a few projects to start with. We have an internal research initiative we call IQ projects, so we can hyper push a team that maybe doesn't have the fee to work on it to come alongside and to infuse more internal funds to make something happen. So we've used this program to help a few projects investigate something. And what I've enjoyed about it is that it really helps the speed or the efficiency and the overlap between still ideating and developing and iterating as we're producing, as we're creating something in Revit. And I don't think we could have arrived at a project called 100 Hood without that process. We're looking at energy code and with an envelope consultant, but looking at a really interesting aesthetic, really dynamic kind of a building. And without that, we probably would have gotten close and been maybe happy. But to be able to infuse that process and see things happening simultaneously, it's just been super rewarding. So computational design and BIM can happen simultaneously. That's my bigger point here.
Thanks, Mike. This is really great, and it's great to have you here. For that, it does a good job of segueing into the next thing I want to do, which is to ask Machine to walk around and see if there are any questions from this. We're going to see how this goes. And Machine walks around and just asks anyone. Don't push them too hard, but you know, they might have some important deadlines we don't want to interfere with, or maybe they need a break. I'm just going to talk and make a couple of points which can be interrupted by this, which is related to my master's thesis, which was titled Parametric Animation. And what happened during that time, I was just trying to talk about parametrics. This is like before really that started getting in the mainstream, I would say. I also had this weird idea that I was going to use all Mac-based software. So I wasn't using Revit at the time. It was pretty new. And I found this weird project with someone that was called Paracloud Gem. And it was a collaboration with someone working on it, probably for their own research they were doing somewhere in the world. I actually forget where they were. But importantly, as I was working through this thesis that was supposed to be comprehensive, Tim can maybe even relate to his thesis he did at the same institution and some of the requirements for us to do comprehensive architecture projects, right? I said, what happens when you do a project on the workflow? When you ask, how do you shift that workflow? And I spent the entire time developing a workflow, actually through this sessions, I called them, documenting those with images, because I felt that that was really hard screenshots. And at the end, I had produced 5,286. I think I changed that number every time, but it's somewhere around there, images that I presented, and actually had no building designed about a week before my project. And then I sat down and ran that parametric process I had worked through 3 times, like over and over again. It took me about 4 hours and I did it 3 times back to back. And within that, it was this process. It wasn't like I just clicked a button and it ran through everything. It took a bunch of involvement. And one of those was to just print whatever it was that happened on my screen, which was like this generated iterative thing. And then I would have to stand up, leave my desk, get some water or something, and look at those and pick one of those to move forward. And why I'm mentioning this is, for whatever reason, I thought it was still important, right, for me to make a decision in this parametric process through a visual way, right? And we tend to be very visual. I can see that Nasheen has just checked out 409 and is potentially back here to said that there might not be any questions.
Well, everyone's quite busy.
Everyone is quite busy. And I think we have finals coming up soon or something. Okay. But how do you guys feel about this? Like, this huge topic, we're kind of coming to the close of our time we have to be a panel together in this format. Like, what is the place of humans in computation? And again, I'll let you fight over the mic.
I'm always quick with the trigger, so if somebody else jump in, I'll follow.
I'll jump in. I guess it's a philosophical kind of thing. I think the machine and the computer came from humans. So I always struggle with the idea of separating the humans from it. I think it came from us. It's an outcome of our sort of lived experience, ingenuity, and sort of like the factors that have brought us here. So I see it as part of that human experience, human ingenuity. I think the question is maybe more, is it important that the human has some, so maybe not human, but like, is it important that the artist, the individual person, has a point in which they can exert some sort of agency in the process, and they're not just like click, 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 that it's not predetermined for them, and they're just moving sliders around, and they can somehow change the trajectory of that? Yes, I think there is, because I see not more necessarily that the machine is enforcing that. I think it is more really just somebody else has determined what you can do and it's imposing that on you. So it's like another person sort of like inhibiting your expressive and your agency. And that would be my take on it. So I think for that very reason, I think yes, because that is how we find new forms of expression. And that's how we sort of maybe discover like certain people who are not involved in the original decision of the process, telling us that, hey, maybe we can use this technology differently, and thereby opening the space of possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I like the whole idea of transhumanism in terms of like, people have been biohacking for thousands of years, right? I mean, we weren't born with shoes, but, so we put shoes on. I wear glasses because my eyes suck, so like there's different augmentations, that we take for granted. Okay, so now there's going to be this opportunity, and you see people embedding NFC chips in their arms, or readers, so you don't have to wear a watch, you can pay for things. I mean, it's experimenting with different chemistries. I mean, it's fascinating, right? And so to me, it's the symbiotic relationship or fusing of the human organism with a digital organism.
Yeah, that's kind of the point I was going to add to, is just technology's always been something that extends and enhances humanity, right? We invented it. And so I know there's the fear of it'll take over and all that stuff, but I believe because we're in control of that process, we can choose what we opt into and say, I want this piece to be automated, but I want to control this for my project. And I think that'll be the future, is actually a bit like you can compartmentalize what you're allowing the computer to do for you and opt into that. And then it will run all these automations, or you start to delegate selectively. So it's not all AI all the time, or it's not all computation all the time. It's like you can opt into this piece, but it's still, you're sort of at the reins of it. And I think that's the future of the creative process, because then we can delegate, is that another designer on my team, or is that a computer that's helping that piece? And we can better organize ourselves. So I'm completely with you guys on that. You want to add in, Jimmy?
Yeah. to me, the technology is always like, it's not for me, not just optimization or automation. Of course, that is the purpose we are using it, because more efficient to help us to work. But I feel as new technology coming in, there's a chance of potential we can just also find creativities inside. And then by that I mean some, now I need to talk about the phone. Some like interesting phone findings coming from misuse of tools from different software, and that's the way the human come in to control, or these tools should be used this way instead of this way. So I feel I want to use the term tool and instrument. If we use a tool as what it is, it's just a tool. But if we use it in innovative way or different way based on our architectural knowledge, and it could be an instrument that help us in the design process.
I had one more thought on that, because I feel like a picture's worth 1,000 words, and then we have motion pictures and videos, and we're not in cinema, we're in design. So when we talked about earlier how words are the carriers of meaning, right? And then we start to do that in software, and we start to invent new languages to codify our design production process. I find it interesting how we're sort of doing everything we can to offload our humanity into a machine, and it creates that conversation. And yet we're finding each other here all over the world on this Zoom call through technology. And so there's connectivity that's happening. So my point is like, what conversations should we be having? What conversation do we want to be having? And, I think there's a lot more nonverbal communication that we can improve on with how we develop our designs that is going to make things better, because we have such robust mediums to sort of, help us orchestrate the process. We don't have to simplify it to abstract language. We can actually interface through a very dynamic, rich, integrated environment.
We have just a couple more minutes left here before we just do our breakdown, hangout, whatever we want to call the last 15 minutes. Another question from the chat from Nushin again here. I'm so happy you're here, by the way.
Okay, thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm listening to all of these great people talking about this really, well, to me, really aspect of design.
It's hard to hear you.
Yeah, I know. Yes, I'm going to paraphrase your question here. Thank you. We're still figuring out how to make sure we have all the mics all over all the time. Here, the question is, continuing on the role of people in computation design and bringing in the aspect of community engagement in the field, how do we make BIM and computation design more accessible and easier for communities? This is where it gets interesting, to understand, comment on, and contribute to the design process.
I'm gonna jump at this one. Sorry. Just take the pressure off Tim a little bit there. I think this is what I find most exciting about technology. I think we've talked about collaboration maybe within a team, but I think technology actually allows us to collaborate to expand who's part of the design team. So shameless plug here, one of the things I'm interested in, the reason why I think it's important to be able to create models of human behavior within that can then feed into the design process, because then it means anybody can sort of develop those models. It's no longer just the architect or no longer just a developer who's discerning to say, hey, this is how people work. Actually, no, a community can say, we want to redevelop. They can use these tool sets to go build sort of these models. And then when somebody has a design proposal, they can give feedback in a very sort of structured, quantitative way, hey, this model is showing us that this actually is not the values we have. So when we talk about the ability to democratize the process, empower different groups, those are sort of some of the things that I find exciting. The same thing when I think about AI models and generative design, really if this communities, can be sort of empowered to be able to maybe train their own models, use their own models, they don't have to wait for somebody to tell them how the community should look like. They now have some tools to be able to say, hey, up front, I wish my community looked like this. It has sort of this aesthetic attributes that they can feed back into the design process. Obviously, there's a challenge as a designer, well, they're taking that away from me. So, the thing that we've tended to be in control in. but I also think it's sort of like empowering because it means we're expanding who has a chance to give feedback, who is able to say like, I have a voice in what I think is a good aesthetic. And I think I'd like to see more and more sort of like exploration and sort of like exciting excitement around that aspect of these tools within the design process.
And thank you, Ade, and all of us. And I'm going to be very blunt about this. This is the end of our discussion. There is much more to talk about. And I also am kind of embracing the fact that we do want to talk more, right? And the FOMO behind all we want to say. So again, thank you to all our panelists here. Thank you to everyone who has joined us online, on site. Thank you, Nasheen, for helping co-moderate. And also, we are just going to leave this on. So you guys are welcome to stay, have a conversation for the next 15 minutes, and look forward to the next panel discussion, which is going to be very intriguing. We actually are going to combine two different topics. One of them is started off at animation. This is actually, Tim, you had mentioned, or I think the difference between animation or entertainment. I forget who said everything. I always have to go back and listen to everything again. Animation and visualization, most specifically with GIS, this prompt. So what are animators doing? How are we seeing rendering game engines being used in the field? And also, what are we seeing as very close to what we're talking about today? Data, GIS, large-scale projects, and that kind of representation. So thank you, everyone. Look forward to talking to you again soon. And again, we have another 10, 15 minutes where we can just let the conversation go wherever it wants. Bye for now.
Thanks, Peter.